Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo, and we are here today with another Titanfall 2 guide. We are talking early game strats, them early game strategies, folks. This is an area in which a huge portion of the community seems to struggle massively. Time and time again, I watch people make some incredibly poor early game decisions. I'm talking as soon as you go boots on the ground, as soon as that timer drops to 0 and you break away to engage the enemy for the first time, player after player, match after match, I watch people throw themselves into the fray to simply die again and again and again. So how do we fix that? Well, it's very simple, and it really revolves around one very important word: deviation. Deviation. We'll get back to that word in a second. Let's actually take a look at a really great example of what most people tend to do. And I think Exoplanet just so happens to highlight the issue perfectly. So we drop in on Exoplanet here. This is one of the most interesting maps when it comes to the spawn points, because both teams are spawning within about 100 yards of each other, maybe less than that. It's probably not even a football field. It's probably like half of a football field. And right away, you're greeted with that building that everyone loves to make their way up onto. And I'm not talking about the high part where I go, I'm talking about the very center location on that map. Immediately, people just go for it. You wanna know why? It's accessible, and they've got a hell of a lot of bloodlust going on. They see it and they say, man, I can get up there in a matter of seconds, and before you know it, I'll be engaging the enemy team. Well, let's look and see what happened. As it turns out, most of my team ends up dead and most of their team ends up dead. Meanwhile, I'm still alive. I maybe didn't have the best engagement that time around, but I was able to throw down my pulse blade, gain that additional situational awareness, and now I'm able to move on and start to engage targets elsewhere while the rest of my team is dead. There's nothing wrong with making use of the center lane, that first initial portion of the map where a lot of players are going to push, but it's all about how you actually choose to engage targets within that center lane. Affixing bayonets and charging up the middle cavalry style isn't going to get you anything more than maybe a 1v1 trade. And that's not really what you want to be going for in Titanfall 2. You don't want to just get a kill and then die. You want to try and maximize the number of kills you get per death to help push your team further and further into the lead. You want the enemy to be chasing you rather than your team chasing them. So let's look at another map and another great example of that deviation I talked about. This is Eden. Eden, of course, has that nice, beautiful railway running right down the middle. It's prime ground to pop your stim and to just run up the center of it and then get shot in the face by a guy with a hemlock. Yeah, and that happens time and time again to the people. There's nothing wrong with wanting to engage the targets that exist on that center lane, and if you equip yourself with the knowledge I'm giving you today, you can farm people who were once like you, the people who sat on the top of that railway, convinced that they would just clean up the enemies that ran down the middle, or convinced that they would run down to the middle to try and clean up the enemies. What I decided to do was to just deviate slightly, knowing that there would probably be enemies on that center lane. I didn't want to get back there, but I instead made my way through the courtyard, clearing it out, making sure there are no enemies, before using that building as a great piece of left side cover, and then popping myself up onto the railway to clean out the multiple targets there. At that point, I'm able to push back into their spawn, again, using the lower elements of the map, using the buildings as cover, cleaning out everyone who decided to camp on that railway. Now, if there was a better player in there somewhere who had been sitting back and was more prepared, I might have got picked off, but the realization is I made a really solid early game push there that led to a 13 kill streak before I ended up dying. Put my team at a huge advantage, and you know what? That match, the second half, we really didn't do that well, but we still won because we had that point lead right from the get-go with that great early game push. And the nice thing was, the majority of my team on that specific instance, they didn't blindly push up the center of the map either. We pretty much just closed in around the enemy, got the kills, and made them basically pay for being so complacent and sitting at the back of the map. You don't want to reward players who camp and wait for you in a defensive position. You want to punish them. And just about every single map in Titanfall 2 will give you the opportunity to do just that if you refuse to take the most accessible route. Again, work on your deviation, look at the other potential openings on the map, and ask yourself if you can utilize them to close in on the enemy from a different angle. That's exactly what you need to focus on here. It's something that so many people they don't really work towards it, or they can't wrap their head around it, and it's just a couple seconds of reconsidering where you're going to go at the start of a match. I think Exoplanet, again, guys, I love watching that footage because it's such a clear-cut example of what you should and shouldn't do. I mean, think about how many kills you could get if you ended up putting yourself in a position to watch that rooftop rather than to be part of the cavalry charge on the rooftop itself. Yeah, a lot of kills. I picked up doubles and triples there. I'm sure a lot of the more astute pilots can attest to that as well. So you just need to take this. You need to look at it like a template, a mindset, if you will, and apply it to all of the different maps and modes in Titanfall 2. Make it a part of your tactical decision making each and every time you jump into a match. Say to yourself, I'm not going to take the most accessible route. I'm going to take the most tactical, intelligent route. I'm going to take the route that gives me solid defensive positioning and survivability while also giving me a great line of sight on people who played like I once played. In a perfect world, no one would ever blindly rush mid and we'd have some pretty crazy lockdown tactical battles and some huge flanks going on. But there will always be fresh players in that pool looking to rush the middle lane. Just make sure you're not one of them, and instead, you're the person cleaning up and getting the kills on them. Let's talk Crash Site. I couldn't do this video without mentioning Crash Site in one way or another. Now, there are plenty of ways in which you can squeeze your way up that first lane in Crash Site, which of course is the most accessible lane. It's the easiest lane. It's the lazy lane, right? Yeah, I'll just run halfway at mid. I'll sit here and maybe the enemy team will come down. Maybe I'll be able to pop off a few rounds with them. Maybe I'll lock this down with my Hemlock. These are all potential ways in which you can deal with the first lane on Crash Site. But what I'd love to see people do is to just flank. Just take a completely different route. Everyone acts like it's the longest, largest map ever, and I could never possibly flank around in time. Maybe that's true, but let's look at it this way. You can either feed into the meat grinder time and time again, and I've seen that meat grinder keep on churning. Someone was cranking away at it for sometimes upwards of 1 to 2 minutes. You know how many deaths that is across both sides? Either one team is getting a huge advantage or both teams are just staying neck and neck and no one's really gaining any value. They're just progressing towards the end of the match. If you flank, and even if you're not the quickest pilot on the roster, you're still going to be able to make your way around, maybe engage targets along the way, maybe not. You will eventually, though, be able to break up the enemy team's spawn. If you make it there, you can just stop them from spawning there. You can reset the spawns and you can put an end to the meat grinder. That's more than enough incentive for me, even as an individual pilot, to go for that early game flank. I'd rather die on that flank than continuously die on that meat grinder time and time and time again. If we can just get everybody away from the mindset of pushing that awful, awful first lane, Crash Site would be a far more enjoyable map for everyone. I think it's the only weak point of that map is where they've chosen to put the spawns. I honestly think a simple spawn switch to maybe the far left lane, which is a little bit more complex, a little bit easier to push, it has more cover, would make it a far more enjoyable map. I want to reiterate these final 2 points before I walk away today. Deviation. I want you to engrave that word, that terminology, that concept into your mind, and I want you to deploy it time and time again into your tactics at the start of each and every match. Where can I go? How can I get to the enemy quickest? But how can I also do it without exposing myself to immediate gunfire? How can I deviate slightly from this route and then return to that route to engage the enemies who are waiting for me? Accessibility. Avoiding the most accessible routes. The most accessible route is often the worst route. It's not a race to see who can die first. It should be a race to get great positioning that can lead you to more kills than deaths right at the start of a match. Once again, the idea here, put your team in a lead and to put the enemy team in a position where they're chasing you throughout the length of the match. I hope this helps a lot of you fresh players out there, people who really just haven't grasped what they should be doing at the start of a match. It really is just a matter of patience, a matter of conscious decision making. If we can end the blind, bayonet-affixed cavalry charges, everyone is going to get far better at this game right from the start of every single match. Play for fun, play to challenge yourself, but most importantly, play smart.
Brilliant hit.